All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to open up by giving all the praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Chakudash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, who rule well and preach the truth and sincerity. Shalom to the hopefully elect. And this is the brother Amawan Ayash from the GMS Indianapolis camp, coming back at you with another quick lesson through the spirit of power, Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. And today's lesson is going to be another installment of our camp series for thy violence against thy brother Jacob, where we go into the various different atrocities and evils that the Edomites, being your so-called white people today, have committed against the Lord's chosen people. The Lord's chosen people, being the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans today. The tribes of Israel, the true children of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. All right. Now, in today's lesson, I have an article from newspapers.com. It took me a minute to, find something decent that I could go into with this article. But here we'll be dealing with the Shreveport lynching of Thomas Miles Sr., which occurred April 9th, 1912. And I had the newspaper page pulled up because, this is really, the only thing I could really find. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and open up with the book of Obadiah, chapter 1, and verse 10. It says, "For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever." And this is the judgment that the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai has declared upon Esau, Edom, so-called white man, due to all the evil that he's exacted upon the children of Israel. Scripture say, "What? Be not deceived. The Most High Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai is not mocked. Whatsoever man soweth, that also shall he reap." You see? And the scripture talked about in Ezekiel the 35th chapter, pertaining to Edom. Ezekiel chapter 35, start at verse 5. It says, "Because thou hast had a perpetual hatred, and hast shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity, and the time that their iniquity had an end. Therefore, as I live, said the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, I will prepare thee unto blood, and blood shall pursue thee. Since thou hast not hated blood, even blood shall pursue thee." So ultimately, all that blood that you will shed, of the Lord's chosen people, that's getting ready to come back upon your own head. You see? And we know that ultimately the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, he's about to let us get our revenge, man. Because first and foremost, before you be cut off forever, beginning with your leaders, being the top wicked leader of Edom, okay, and the chief rulers of these other nations. Guess what? According to Psalms 149, verses 5 on down, what's going to happen is they're going to be the first fruits of slavery. You see, and you Edomites and other heathen nations, we understand that what you're going to serve 1,000-year period of captivity, man. Long, hard, rigorous. And ultimately after that 1,000 years, we know Edom to be the only nation, of all the nations of the earth, to be completely wiped out forever. You see? Let's go back to Obadiah, and then we'll get into the newspaper article. Back into Obadiah 1. And verse 18, it says, "And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble, and they shall kindle in them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai has spoken it." You see, so ultimately this is the end judgment of the so-called white people, the so-called white race, which according to scripture, they are known as the Edomites. After they serve out their 1,000-year period of captivity, under our authority, we're going to round up the remaining Edomites and burn them up, man. And from then on, there will never be an Edomite to ever step foot upon the planet Earth ever again. You see? So let's go ahead and go through this. I do got to get ready for camping a little bit. So, Lord willing, this is edifying, concise and straight to the point. But as you can see, the headlines read, Miles hanged, Salakia. Miles hanged for an insult to young lady, which, it's the same thing over and over and over again. These events, these lynchings, these situations occur, based off of an accusation, that the Jake man, made some sort of advance, toward a so-called white woman, Whether it be, a physical gesture, said something verbal, right, wrote a note, whatever the case may be. And they always end up in the demise of Jake. Even though these devils have no proof of the accusation, okay, but ultimately, within their minds, right, that perpetual hatred that they have toward you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans is enough in justifying them putting you to death. It says, the stiff and lifeless form of Tom Miles, the Negro released Monday night after being held for 2 or 3 days because he had written several insulting letters to a young white girl, found about 6 o'clock this morning, hanging at the end of a window cord under a small oak tree just off Pierre Avenue, back of the old skating rink. Says it spoke mute and impressive evidence of the sure and deadly revenge exacted by a band of unknowns. You see what these devils, man, they carried out that evil upon this Jake individual. That's who the band of unknowns is, right? These fucking devils. You see, and ultimately, once again, this is all based off of an accusation. You see, which when we look into history, right, they never find substantial evidence to prove, right, the accusations to be right. You see, so that's why the scriptures say what in Sirach or Ecclesiasticus chapter 11 and verse 7. It says, blame not before thou hast examined the truth, understand first, and then rebuke. You see, and we understand that what Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, because once again, when it comes to you, Jake's, man, all that's on his mind is that perpetual hatred that he has against you. You see, so Esau, he's not going to try and gather all the evidence and gather all the facts, to try to justify your cause, right? When it comes to you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, right? All this devil knows is that he hates you, right, with his guts, and he wants you out of sight, out of mind. You see? Psalms the 83rd chapter goes into how these nations were confederate with one another and trying to blot out the name of Israel out of remembrance. You see, and make us a nation no more, roughly paraphrasing. You see? So let's go from there to the book of Exodus, chapter 23, and verse 1. It says, thou shalt not raise a false report. And when you look throughout history, dealing with these accusations placed upon the Jake, man, all right, they're all false reports, man. Because Jake just be minding their business. They might come across a white woman, which that white woman, majority of the time will make the advances towards the Jake man first. And guess what? The Jake man ends up being penalized for it. You see, so here in the land of America, all right, there's always been snares and traps, all right, laid out for Jake. You see, and when you observe today, right, Esau don't like it when his woman, right, the white woman cleaves unto Jake. Say just like back then, if the slightest right form of interest, right, was seen between the so-called black man and the so-called white woman, and the so-called white man caught wind of it, they was out for Jake head. Right? It says, put not thine hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. You see? And ultimately, in majority, if not all of these cases, man, all right, these Edomites are straight up unrighteous witnesses, man. All right, just because it's a so-called black man, all right, yeah, he did it. No, he made advances toward the so-called white woman. He harassed her. He did this, that, and the third. When in the reality of things, right, this devil was just trying to find a way to justify, right, him killing you. You see, which once again, in his mind, that perpetual hatred that he has towards the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, that's enough. It says, so that's the point. Let's jump back in the article. It says, The body had been hanging there for several hours, judging from its condition. The scene of the lynching is in a dense grove of oak trees and in a section where there is little travel, which probably delayed the discovery. About 6 o'clock Tuesday morning, a little Negro boy came running out of this grove and finding C.J. McElroy, a machinist who resides on Fair Place, told him that there was a man hanging in a tree back in the grove. McElroy went and verified the boy's story and then notified the police. Coroner S.Y. Alexander, when notified of the affair, ordered the body removed to Williams Undertaking Establishment, Texas Avenue, about 7 o'clock. It says what caused it. Miles and another Negro, Sandy McIntyre, were arrested Sunday night upon information that Miles had been carrying notes to a young lady who boards on Travis Street and who clerks in the store. These notes contained proposals, and it was first thought that Miles was carrying them for another person. When arrested, Miles declared that McIntyre had also been telephoning some of the girls at the same place, and McIntyre was also arrested. The matter was kept quiet until it could be thoroughly investigated, but to avoid notoriety, the police, with other interested parties, thought it best to turn the Negroes out and make them leave town. And ultimately, we know in the grand scheme of things that, they didn't thoroughly investigate the situation, right? They didn't thoroughly investigate the case. When Jake is involved and Jake is a suspect or the culprit, man, hey, really, man, these devils, man, they want to throw the whole book at you, man. They really want to kill you. If we're being honest, that's how it was going down back then. You see, so Jake never really had a fair trial, man. And also because that perpetual hatred that Esau has towards the nation of Israel. It says the Negroes were released about 10 o'clock Monday night with instructions to go. They left the station, Miles going out the back way while McIntyre took the front door. It is supposed that the parties who carried out the lynching had planned the affair very carefully and had kept a man stationed near the city hall to watch for the release of the Negroes. At any rate, they evidently saw Miles when he came out the back way and trailed him to where they could handle him with the least trouble. McIntyre, in going the front way, evidently escaped them, though it was persistently rumored throughout the city Tuesday that he had been caught and dealt with in a similar manner. The lynchers evidently followed the Negro to his room in his pool room on Common Street, and after he had gone to bed, went in and seized him. Last night, when released, he wore a blue serge suit, but when found hanging, he wore a brown suit and his shoes were not laced, as evidence of haste in dressing. He was then gagged and bound, taken to the grove back of the skating rink, and the window cord on one end of which, and it continues on page 2, which I have that pulled up. Slack it. Bear with me 1 second. All right, so that's how they did it. Continue on page 2. It says, let's read that sentence again. It says, he was then gagged and bound, taken to the grove back of the skating rink, and the window cord on one end of which, we're getting ready to continue on page 2. As you can see right here, continue from page 1. It says, Slovakia. It says, was a hangman's loop dropped over his neck. The cord was thrown over a limb about 12 feet from the earth. The Negro was drawn up until his feet dangled about 12 inches from the ground, and then the cord was tied to a nearby tree. It says, although residents on Pierre Avenue declared they heard 6 pistol shots in that neighborhood about 2:30 o'clock, It says the body of the Negro was not shot according to the examination made at the coroner's inquest held at 8 o'clock last night. These shots, however, were evidently fired by the mob and set the time of the lynching at between 2 and 3 o'clock yesterday morning. It says Dr. Alexander held an inquest at 8 o'clock last night, but it was merely a formal affair and developed no new evidence. The jury found that Miles had died at the hands of unknown parties by being hanged to a tree. You know, that's what they say, quote unquote, unknown parties. Now, we know it was a mob of so-called white men, you know, that went up in his home or in his room, right, and they killed him, man. You know, that's how it always goes. It says, although there was no positive evidence that Miles was guilty of the suspicions which the police held in arresting Sunday night and for which he had paid with his life, the circumstantial evidence was very strong against him. He had written and delivered 2 notes to the young lady on Travis Street. Each time he would call her over the telephone pretending that he was a friend and tell her that he was sending a note by a Negro boy. She was alarmed by them, and the third time he called, she asked him to call around immediately himself and get her answer. Miles then made his appearance a few minutes later and was taken in charge by a young man at the place. Sergeant Gerald and Officer George then went down and arrested him. Miles then declared that he had merely been carrying notes for a white man. It says, however, he practically broke down such a plea when he admitted that Sandy McIntyre had been telephoning girls at the same place, which resulted in the arrest of McIntyre and the placing of both of them in the lockup. The case against Miles was further strengthened by the fact that it was known that he had written similar letters to other white women, principally to girls in St. Paul's Bottoms. He signed the name of F. Jones. The 2 letters received by the young lady and one Miles sent to a woman in St. Paul's Bottom, which was already in the possession of the police, were identical in handwriting. The letters to the young lady are as follows, which, you know, here's the letters right here, which, no, we're not going to go ahead and get into that. We could pretty much cut it off right there. But, you know, as you can see, all right, it's the same thing over and over and over again. You know, as the scriptures talk about what, that there is no new thing under the sun. So there's no clear, right, or substantial evidence, right, when it comes to the accusations placed upon Jake. But nonetheless, that doesn't matter to Esau, right? Because Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, is an unrighteous judge. You see, and once again, all this devil knows is that he hates you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans with his guts, man. You see, so in his mind, that enough is enough to justify, right, the things that he does to you, man. The evil that he commits against you, man. You know, so we'll go ahead and get a couple more scriptures, and that'll be the lesson. Let's go to the book of Amos, the 1st chapter, and verse 11. It says, thus saith the Lord Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4 I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because he did pursue his brother with the sword, and did cast off all pity, and his anger did tear perpetually, and he kept his wrath forever. And the wrath, right, that Esau, Edom, so-called white man, has towards the children of Israel is very much present to this day. You see, so due to that, all right, the Lord Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, he's not going to turn away the judgment that he has purposed to bring upon Esau, Edom, so-called white man. And what's that judgment? Right, that he serves a hardcore bondage for 1,000 years, and after that 1,000 years, the nation of Edom will be no more remembrance. You see, no more Edomites upon the planet Earth. All right, let's go to the book of Joel, the 3rd chapter, and verse 19. It says, Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom shall be a desolate wilderness, which ultimately this is going to the destruction that the Lord Yahweh Bashmi Yahushai is going to bring upon the land of Babylon the Great, aka America, right, which is ruled by Edom. All right, and we're getting ready to read why. It says, for the violence against the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. So everything you've done, right, from the tribe of Judah all the way on down to the tribe of Issachar, all right, you got to pay for that, man. All right, the scriptures talk about in Numbers, the 35th chapter, In verse 33, it says, "So ye shall not pollute the land wherein ye are, for blood it defileth the land. And the land cannot be cleansed of the blood that is shed therein, but by the blood of him that shed it." So we know that the only way that all the blood, right, of the Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans that has been shed upon this land in America, the only way all of that can be recompensed is by the destruction of Babylon the Great, aka America, which in that day when the Lord brings the destruction upon America, our blood will be shed. You see? And I'll go ahead and leave you with this in the book of Habakkuk, the 2nd chapter. I'll jump straight to the point in verse 12. It says, "Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, establisheth a city by iniquity, and has not Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, built up the land of America, right, through the blood, sweat, and tears of the so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, right? And when you look at how this place was founded, right, it was founded through nothing but wickedness, right? Mass murder, rape, robbery, bloodshed, right? Hey, the list of charges that's upon Esau, Edom, so-called white man, is never ending, man. So the Lord said, woe unto him that does this. Woe was what? Death and destruction. And we read in Obadiah that for the violence that he's committed against the children of Israel, that what? He's going to be cut off forever, man. You see? So, hey, man, that's that. You know? So I pray that this lesson was edifying and informative and Salakia. I pray that this lesson was edifying, informative, and educational in some way, shape, or form to the elect body of the nation of Israel. And without further ado, I would like to close out by giving all the praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Hakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well and preach the truth and sincerity. Shalom to the hopeful elect. Lord's, I'll see you in the next lesson. Till then, I say shalom.